Unfortunately, we don't have just unlimited amounts of mid-block sections, which, just segments. There are invariably locations where the cycling route needs to cross over a carriageway and thus forming the intersection. And we're going to go through today of how we can manage that interaction, specifically around signalized intersections, so where riders are on the carriageway or adjacent to the carriageway, and how we can apply best practice safe cycling infrastructure within those spaces. As mentioned, we're recording, and good news. Our friend Wally is back on board. So Wally's come out of his little, what are they called? Dens? Does he sleep in a den? Yeah, he's come up and decided to have another little poke around, and he will be featured in today's module. So make sure that you're looking out for our little pal there. This one is not included in the count. So you're at 0 Wallies, but you will be seeing him. And I'll be truthful, Wally is quite a good hider in today's module. So make sure you've got your glasses on. Out of your burrow, that's right, not a den, a burrow. Prize out to Carolyn. Thank you, Carolyn. Before we get started into the intersection space, I just wanted to touch on a few topics that we didn't cover in previous module, but it's good intel to have going forward. One is the idea of how we can manage cycling conflict points adjacent bus stops. Recently, actually, VicRoads, or the Department of Transport and Planning here in Victoria, they released an entire guidance document on this specific topic, which is excellent. And one of the treatments that's really being advocated for is this idea of a floating bus stop. And all that means is, I'll just focus on the aerial view where you've got a bicycle facility. It looks to be separated on road. And rather than continuing in that alignment, it actually gets brought, closer to the footpath and runs behind the bus shelter there. And the reason that you'd be, putting the riders in that position is so that when people hop on and off the bus, they're not automatically in the path of a rider. So it's basically to eliminate that conflict point as soon as they're exiting the bus or about to hop on. That's not where the conflict point is. It's moved further away where it's a little bit easier to manage that conflict. And what also occurs is kind of dedicated crossing points for pedestrians, once again facilitated by the zebra crossing, just to clearly articulate where you're encouraging your peds to access those bus shelters. Got another example here. So the first one I should have mentioned, that was in Manchester in the UK. But this one is just in Geelong in Victoria. And this is not using a floating bus stop idea because it would be a little bit difficult to try and get riders into that footpath space. There's just not a lot of room there. So instead, it is actually maintaining the alignment, but what's occurring is they've raised the bus stop shelter or waiting area up so that when pedestrians are crossing over that area, it's a lot more obvious that they're accessing that spot. And also the raised crossing and the ramp will slow down riders so that they're more aware of this conflict point. So just an example there of using raised facilities on a cycle path. Another one I quickly wanted to touch on is this idea of a bicycle boulevard or advisory bicycle lanes. There's a few different names going around for this kind of setup. And the way that it works is you create one central travel lane for general traffic, and that would permit travel in both directions. And then you create bicycle lanes that are consistent throughout that arrangement. So the traffic lane, there's only one of them for both directions, but there's 2 bicycle lanes, one for each way. You'd only be doing this in low speed, low volume routes. So you don't want to have the interaction between opposing vehicles occurring regularly, because they do have to access the adjacent bike lane. So just an example of this one's just out of Canada, where the speed is 40 kilometers per hour and traffic volumes around 1,000 vehicles per day. And as you can see, riders, they do have their cycling facilities all the way through this alignment, but there's only enough room in this central traffic lane for one vehicle at a time. This is the kind of signage scheme that they have adopted over there. In Canada, we'd use something slightly different, but hopefully it gives you the idea of how this actually works in practice. And we do have an example of this installed in Napier Street, Fitzroy, which is just in inner city Melbourne. And because this was the kind of pilot project for this type of treatment and was new for this area, there was a bit of community engagement just to ensure everyone was understanding how this would operate. And so they decided to create a informational video just to clearly demonstrate how this new environment would function. And I've just taken some little snips from this video so you can see what's going on. We've got a vehicle there heading up towards the top of the screen, and then we've got riders in those advisory bicycle lanes. If that blue vehicle heading north or up happens to see an oncoming vehicle, they need to slow down and yield, give way to any riders that are in the bicycle lane. When it's clear to enter that space, they can. And while using that space, there's enough width there to allow that passing of each of the vehicles there. So the riders get the nice continuous facility. It's the vehicles that are kind of being, treated as second class almost, because they have to yield and give way to oncoming traffic. The way that traditionally this may have been installed is there'd be no bicycle lanes and there'd just be 2 traffic lanes. So it's trying to instead promote that active transport and provide that continuity for riders. So that has been installed. It still currently looks like this. Depending on who you ask, it's a nice treatment, but yeah, it was a fair bit of community engagement to get this one across the line, just because residents were a bit confused as to how this may operate. A question in there from Jared. What speed does this bicycle boulevard operate at? Yep, around 30 kilometers per hour. Thank you, Edmund. 30 to 40 kilometers per hour, low speed, low traffic volume. Okay, hopefully everyone managed to watch the 360-degree video from our last module, where you got to experience what it felt like riding in a protected bicycle facility, and also got that perspective of riding within the dooring zone. So particularly interested, if you've never actually ridden bikes in these scenarios, how you felt that. I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. Hopefully you got a bit of appreciation why riders are so hesitant to ride close to that dooring area. Alrighty, so today's focus is going to be on intersections, and a lot of the guidelines and figures that are referred to in today's session is taken out of a NACTO resource, which is North American, appropriately named Don't Give Up at the Intersection. And there are Australian guidelines, TMR in particular, that has very similar guidance and things like that. We've chosen this one just because the figures are very well graphically designed. So it's just a lot easier to help convey the messaging of what these intersection layouts look like. But by all means, use your own supplements to help with your projects. I will say Austroads and the Australian standards in particular are far, far behind what is being kind of recommended in these documents and is considered best practice elsewhere. So we're going to talk about this idea of a protected intersection, and we'll talk exactly what that looks like, the design elements of a protected intersection. We'll provide some case studies internationally of exactly how they have been applied and the design considerations associated with them. And we'll also have a look at Melbourne's protected intersection. We're also going to have a chat later on today about signalized intersections and talk about more conventional features that are applied, such as head start boxes and hook turns, as well as bicycle signals, and how we can manage that left turn and through conflict, that treatment ideas within that space as well. So that's going to be the agenda for today, and I won't delay any further. I'll get stuck into it. And I think a good way to get started with this topic is just to give you an overview of protected intersections. So I'm not just saying the word, you can actually hopefully envisage what the design entails. So this is a graphic rendition of Melbourne's protected intersection. And what I really want you to focus on at this stage is that at every corner or quadrant of the intersection are these weird little corner refuge islands, is what they're called, but they're just little bits of curb and they've got this funny little shape. They serve a very important purpose that we'll speak about in a moment, but they're really a key design feature of our protected intersection. Now, the way that this works is if you were, say, turning right at this type of intersection and heading from the bottom of the screen, you may be, paused at this location here. You can see that there is a stop line there. And that's because just like all other traffic, you need to yield when there's the red, and you've got your own phasing, which is also linked with the adjacent through traffic phase. And if you were turning right, you'd wait for your green and position yourself at the next hold line, which is just hidden underneath that banner there. You can prop and wait there. And then once you get the green again, you're good to cross over and continue your journey. So that's just a demonstration of a right turn movement at a protected intersection. We'll speak more about the details in the next couple slides. So within a conventional intersection, the way that majority of our network looks is we would have the bicycle lane or the bicycle facility directly adjacent to the left turn traffic lane. And what this actually means is we've got a small offset. So the offset that's mentioned in this graphic or this figure, that's just the distance between where the cyclist is crossing over and where the left turn lane is. So it's just that kind of distance there, that width. A protected intersection is deliberately designed to maximize this offset. So it's trying to make that a wider offset. And the reason that you want to be doing that is because we can see within the conventional intersection, this kind of triangular shape represents the driver's point of view or where they're focused on. The rider is not within that. And that is just based on the geometry of the intersection. Basically, the rider is in the blind spot of that left turning vehicle. Conversely, we look at the protected intersection and we can see the side triangle there is focused on those crossing riders. So riders are no longer crossing on your passenger side door. They're crossing much more right in front of you through your windscreen. So it's much easier to be able to see them. So protected intersections are largely set up to reduce this as a risk, which is your left turn and through crash type. And the way that it is achieved is through the introduction of those corner refuge islands. So here's another example of just the layouts of comparison between those two intersection types. So conventional, you've got very small offsets between the bicycle facility and the left turn traffic lane. And protected intersection has a much wider or maximized offset. Now, I realize my penmanship isn't the best for today, but what you can see is, it's bothering me. I'm going to clear it all off and I'll do it again. I'm going to draw these out again, and let's have a look at that as an angle. So that's the conflict angle there. And you can see it's quite acute. So acute meaning it's a sharp angle. And we know that if you've got sharp angles, makes it difficult for drivers to see any crossing users. So instead we try and get as close to perpendicular as possible, which is what our protected intersection is able to facilitate. So the protected intersection opens up the sight lines by creating that perpendicular crossing points. Makes it much easier for drivers to be able to see crossing cyclists and also pedestrians in that space. One on the left is actually noted as a conventional intersection, although I wouldn't call this conventional because traditionally you wouldn't have any type of separation there. You'd just have a thin white line and that's all you'd get for your different facilities. But the argument still remains the same, where the offset is still quite narrow and a left-turning vehicle, particularly at this kind of skewed intersection, would have a pretty tough time of seeing any riders that are traveling through there. Comparing that to where you've got much more width or much more offset provided, and you're able to accommodate that maximizing of the sight lines. Alrighty, so some of the features that we need to be aware of for a protected intersection are laid out through this kind of diagram. Number one is really the most important, which is the corner refuge island. The reason that that really needs to be incorporated is because that is what provides that offset. Without that, you wouldn't be able to achieve the offset. So let's just say that wasn't there. A left-turning vehicle would just be able to cut straight across the intersection, which would then limit the effectiveness of getting that conflict angle to perpendicular. So that's not what you want to do. You want to tighten up that turning movement, and you want to create that corner refuge island that really facilitates slow left-turning movements that it's going to open up those sight lines. So really, really important there. Number two is the forward bicycle queuing area. And I should just confirm this, as it is a North American resource. It looks a little bit different to what we would do and slightly different words, but that's okay. We're just teaching the principles here. This is basically just an area for riders to be able to stop and wait without having to, pause on the carriageway or block the adjacent cycling stream. So you don't want to have riders, have to be positioned here or something like that, and then riders can't get through the other direction. You want to make sure that there's adequate space there to be able to accommodate that. Number three, motorist yield zone, just ensuring that there's adequate space there. Ideally, you would have enough space that a vehicle that is turning left there doesn't hold up a vehicle that's behind them that maybe wants to go through. Obviously, that's only relevant if it's a left and through shared lane. But that's kind of the parameter that you tend to work in. Number four is a pedestrian crossing island. And the reason that this is incorporated is just to make sure that with these types of facilities, you're not actually recommending a shared path or a shared area crossing here. You're still saying we're going to have riders, you go over this side of the intersection, and pedestrians, you cross over here. So there's still these two separate facilities. The reason that we would really strongly encourage that is because prior to this intersection, it's very, very likely that there's been separate facilities there. So it could be an on-road cycling facility and a footpath, or it could be a separated cycling facility and a footpath. They're two separate entities. You then don't want to try and share it at this intersection because it's just going to increase the risk of riders weaving in and out of pedestrian traffic and just be uncomfortable for everyone. So really just wanted to make sure everyone's aware of that. We are still separating pedestrians and riders at these types of intersections as well. Number 5 is pedestrian crossing over the separated bike lane. And the way that this has been demarcated is through the use of a zebra crossing, which I think is an excellent idea. And the reason I'm so fond of this is if you were riding along here and you get to this point, the zebra crossing clearly articulates that this is a pedestrian priority area. So I need to yield and give way to pedestrians. It's very difficult to make that the other way. It's very difficult to tell pedestrians you need to stop and give way to cyclists because it's just not a common thing to do. The other reason that you do that is if pedestrians have got the green here and they're walking along, it's very big ask to then be like, when you get to this point, slow down and give way to riders when they've had all of that priority going through there. It's just not really feasible thing to be doing. So putting the zebra crossings across the bicycle lanes, big tick, makes a lot of sense. Final one there is the pedestrian curb ramp or pram ramp, just ensuring that pedestrians are able to access the adjacent footpath. Now, I'm going to hop into some case study examples, but I might just pause there and check in with Marissa.
Lots of questions on this slide. Do they generally have cycling traffic posts and signals so cyclists are aware of phasing?
Sorry, I missed that one, Marissa.
Am I coming through okay?
Yeah.
Okay, do they generally have cycling traffic posts and signals so cyclists are aware of phasing?
Yes, there's definitely separate lanterns. So there'd be a pedestrian, a cyclist, and then general traffic lanterns, all separate.
Yeah. Okay. And use of barrier curbs at the waiting bay, is this to allow a good solid step or curb to stop at?
Really good pickup. I don't recommend the barriers there at all. I think that's more an artistic rendition and not necessarily saying that that should be installed like that. Most of the time, that is semi-mountable. Great eyes. Let's give that a prize.
Great. And Chris is just also asking about push buttons when waiting.
Yes, so they are most likely situated on the footpath. Can't see it here, but they would be on that far side of the quadrant. It's actually really, really strange in this figure that there's a little hole there. You'd never, ever, ever do that because people would run into that all the time. So you would not put any infrastructure at all on the corner refuge island because it's quite likely to be struck.
Thanks, Max. Catherine.
Hello. Yes, Max, just around people who have visual impairments, how do they navigate the crossing when there's so much going on here?
It's a valid question, and by no means am I a DDA expert or specialist within this space. It looks quite peculiar at this angle, but from a footpath level, if you're walking along here, the kind of experience crossing that environment is pretty similar. So you'd still have your push button somewhere here. You push that. The only kind of difference is crossing over the bicycle facility first. But yeah, I think, well, I can speak to Melbourne's protected intersection in particular, where there was a lot of this stakeholder engagement, which we'll cover in them later on in today's session. That can help give you some ideas of how that could be managed. But generally, these things are best spoken with those communities that will be affected, and also engaging specialists that know the ins and outs of this kind of topic and can provide, really detailed solutions.
Yeah, that's right. And I know from previous experience, when something has been rolled out on the network and it's pretty foreign and it's new to people who do have visual impairments or mobility issues, they're very much part of the design process. So, it's a community group that you engage to ensure that you're capturing those issues at early stages of design as well. So it's not just put it out on the network and then, work it out, band-aid treatments, like, just to ensure we accommodate for all people. Yes. Just
Perfect.
another question, Max. So if a through cyclist traveling at speed comes into contact with a car that fails to give way, that's still a serious crash. Do we need to moderate bike speeds as well as limiting turning vehicle speeds through design?
Great question. I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I suppose when we consider the impact speed, and remember last module I drew that little graph of the probability of fatality and the speed there. That's the speed of the vehicle. So the 30 km/h limit or benchmark, aspiration, whatever you'd like to call it, that's kind of what we're aiming for those conflict speeds. These intersections can actually reduce left turn speeds to that low because, depending on how tight this radius is, drivers have to physically slow down quite a lot. You would expect it to be more 10, 15 km/h. But if a rider's traveling at that speed, you're right, there is still the possibility of occurring quite serious outcomes. I still think that, definitely the pros outweigh the cons in this arrangement. If you're 100% aware that this is a really common route for training cyclists, then maybe this isn't the right treatment because they might not even use this as an option because it does deviate from the path. And training riders will not deviate from the path. They will just use a traffic lane that's dead straight so they can maintain that 40 km/h pace. So there's a multitude of ways that you could examine that issue, and I don't think there's a one uniform approach answer I could give for that.
Yeah, thanks, Max. And just to clarify, the zebra crossing in this example is not raised. Someone just asked, is it raised?
It is not raised, but you could look to raise it.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Max.
That works. I'll go to some examples now that might help iron out some of these issues of how it can actually be used in practice, because it's always tricky when you're just looking at artists' interpretation. We'll look at some real sites. So first site, we'll have a look at the Netherlands here, of course. And this is an example of a conventional intersection. So this is like the before case. And I'm going to draw out the movement of a rider that wants to travel through this intersection. And I'm going to be focusing on like a north-south type of journey. It's a bit difficult to see, but see the ... line marking on that leg? That's where the bicycle lane was. So it's just on that curbside there. So if you're a rider and you wanted to travel through, you might do something that looks like this, riding close to the curbside. And a left turn vehicle on that same leg, remember you've both got the green, so you're both being encouraged to go. A left turn vehicle would do something like that. That's another really good example of that really, really tight conflict angle. And we know whenever we have those tight conflict angles, we're going to get quite limited sight lines, restricted sight lines. So that's prior to the installation of protected intersection. And this is what it looks like now. And I'm going to do the same exercise where I'll show the path of a north-south rider. So the cyclist traveling along kind of gets ushered off into this off-road type of facility, but you can see it's much closer to the footpath. There's a hold line there. So they may have to wait until they get the green. They might get the green the same time as the adjacent traffic lane. They could also get a head start, but we'll talk to that in a moment. And then they're good to go. Then they can travel through and continue their journey. And similarly, I'll draw the path of our left turn vehicle in this scenario, where because we've got that corner refuge island, we've got that conflict point that's much closer to the 90 degrees there. I'll show you some photos of what this one looks like out on the ground. And I want you to pop in the chat anything that looks a little bit peculiar about this site, or something that maybe we wouldn't do within our jurisdiction. So give you 30 seconds in the chat to have a think about what looks a little bit unusual about this intersection. And I'll have a drink of water. It's got nothing to do with the signage.
While we're waiting for the many answers to come through in the chat, Max, there was a question earlier on in the session about helmets and how some countries don't require helmets, and here in Oz we do. So just, is there any sort of data that we know of the pros and cons of that? I know we don't touch on it much in this session, but thought as in the example, not many people, well, no one's wearing a helmet. I just thought
that's right.
it was
in the Netherlands,
it's in the
not
Netherlands,
required.
so
No.
yeah, so yeah, just more of a interesting conversation.
It's a good debate. I mean, I'm all for helmets, but I recognize I'm really biased. I mean, I've grown up in this environment where it's just something that you do, and
Yeah.
it's just part of riding a bike. And I'm sure I'd have a different opinion if I grew up in a different area.
Yeah.
I mean, I've certainly heard the arguments saying that, you know, if you make people wear them, then they're not going to do it, and you get less ridership and things like that. And there's also arguments to say that the helmet's not going to do all that much because the damage is between the brain and the skull, and that's where the helmet's not going to fix that. But at the same time, if I was hit by a car, I'd still much prefer to have a helmet on than not have a helmet. So I certainly go for them, and I think that they work. But yeah, that's just my opinion, really.
Yeah, same.
Do you have a thought, Catherine?
Oh, similar to you, Max. Like it's just habit. Like I get on the bike and my helmet's on. Like and I think I feel a bit odd not wearing it. But again, I think it's just the environment we were brought up in, and you know, cycling education at school was always put your helmet on. So it's I guess it's the seatbelt law, right? Like you get in the car, you put your seatbelt on.
Yeah,
it's
just
the
part of
same.
your practice. Yeah.
That's right. Anywho,
Good.
I
Thank you,
take it down a
Catherine.
different path.
Awesome to see lots of different answers come through the chat. Yeah, so there are some peculiar things going on. Yeah, the line marking and stuff like that, that's just jurisdictional. That's called shark's teeth line marking for those interested. The signal and the poles and stuff like that look different, but the answer that I was actually looking for, or the one that we'll give a prize out to, Marissa, is the fact that all of this carriageway and adjacent footpath is at one level. So it's all at grade. That's really uncommon and not something that we would recommend here at all. And the reason for that is, so remember this is right-hand side, this example. So they're their right turn would be our left turn. If you had a vehicle that was doing a right turn here, it's quite easy for them to mount both the corner refuge island and the adjacent cycling or pedestrian area, which is not the outcome that you want. You want to make sure that you're clearly demarcating that space. At the moment, it all looks like a similar material, similar color, similar, feel, and it just, to me, looks a little bit like it's all the same surface. And I don't think we could get away with this kind of treatment in Australia. I think we definitely need to be doing curves and stuff like that, because we would have a lot of motorists encroaching into that space. But this is the Netherlands, where it's a different culture and they're expecting to see riders at every single intersection and things like that. So perhaps don't have the same rigor there. But we'll give a prize out there. I saw it mentioned a few times, the lack of the flush curves, or it's all flush, sorry. Got another example here. This one is in Maryland in the United States, and we've got the same design philosophy being applied here, where we've got the corner refuge islands at each of the quadrants. But if we have a look at the legend and what's actually being proposed, we can see that the grey material is some type of concrete, and then closer to the inside is some type of brick. And the question I've got for the group is, why do you think they are proposing two separate materials for the corner refuge island? So why are there two separate materials? I've got Harrison in very early with encroachment area for turning vehicles, which is absolutely spot on. Snowplow axis, interesting. It is a mountable apron is another term for it, and it is to facilitate your long or your heavy vehicle. So just as an example, if you're a passenger vehicle driving along here, you can quite easily perform that left turn, and that's okay. The edge of your traffic lane is marked by the edge of the concrete there. However, if you were driving a garbage truck or a school bus, you'd need to pick, the longest vehicle that's suitable for that route. You would find that the path of that vehicle follows something more like this. So through swept path analysis, it was determined, well, we need to make this first area mountable. In other words, it's easy to drive on, so that we can still accommodate those large vehicles, but ensure that, they can't just take up the whole intersection or the whole quadrant. So still providing some curved area where it's above that carriageway level. This is what it looks like on the ground, which might help explain that a little bit more. So you can, maybe a little bit easy to see in the distance, but the concrete mountable apron, that's at the same level as the carriageway, and that's just additional space for those large vehicles to be able to turn. Whereas the bricked area, that's elevated to ensure that those large vehicles are not encroaching any further. So it's just, that's where their edge of the traffic lane is, basically. Another jazzy thing about this site is one of the legs is bi-directional. I'm not sure if anyone noticed that. This leg here supports travel in both directions, whereas all the other legs are just one way. So just a reminder there that you can actually incorporate protected intersections with a bi-directional facility. So it's not just limited to unidirectional, or a combination, as we're seeing here. And that's a bi-directional leg that you can see there. Alrighty, we've got another example. This one's another part of the globe now. This one's back in Manchester. And this is the Cycle Optimise Protected Signals Junction, which is a big mouthful, but you can just type in Cyclops Junction in Manchester, and you can have a good look at this one. And And there's a few quirky things going on with this site, but something that I think is certainly worth mentioning. And consistently what we're seeing, we've still got these protected corner refuge islands at each of the quadrants. But what's also provided in this example are these giant bike boxes or head start boxes. Now, you may remember when I said what a right turn would look like for a rider, which I'll draw out again. We had a rider turning right. They might have to pause here and wait for the green, get the green, pause there, again, have to wait for the green, and then continue that journey. And although it doesn't look like much, actually riding that can feel like quite a significant deviation and not attractive to some riders. And they've acknowledged that in this Manchester example, and they've said, well, we know that not all riders will want to deviate from their path and will want to just take what's the most convenient route for them. And basically, we're going to recognize that and somewhat encourage that for those that feel comfortable. So for some riders that do just want to get there as quick as possible, they can just put themselves in this head start box. When they get the green to go, they can push themselves into this right turn traffic lane. So that is, you know, just for general traffic, but riders can treat themselves just like general traffic as well and use that as an option. This would be a filtering movement, so they would be required to pick that gap in traffic, and when they get that gap, they can finish off that right turn. Much shorter distance to ride. So I think this is a very sensible, elegant solution, acknowledging that, yes, the protected intersection does improve the safety because it really opens up those sight lines, but not all riders are that concerned about that. They're not really concerned about the risks associated with that movement. And they're willing to, you know, accept a higher level of risk. And so there's still that opportunity to perform, you know, a more conventional right turn at this location. So some would say that's not a great idea. We should just be going all the protected intersection. Everyone should use that. But I don't think the world is as black and white as that, and we'll never get 100% compliance on any type of design that we try and offer up. Here's what this one looks like out on the ground. Catherine.
Hello. Just a question on cycle detector loops, Max. Generally, they're laid out in these intersections, aren't they, to pick up cyclists in the head start box?
Yes, that's correct. Generally, same configuration, just got a different magnetic thing on them to make sure that they can pick up bikes. But I've also seen visual ones being used as well. So they use like cameras to detect the presence of riders.
Yeah.
But certainly the loops are more common.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Max.
Oh, no problem. So this one is what it looks like out on the ground. And this is an example here of the conflict point that I mentioned before with pedestrians crossing over the cycle lane. And I, as I said before, would actually recommend just doing a zebra crossing because that's much more globally understood as pedestrians have right of way, riders need to give way. This yellow box, perhaps in Manchester, is incredibly well understood as meaning exactly that. But yeah, that's where I would recommend the zebra crossing to be implemented there. Alrighty, I'm going pretty well for time, so I'll keep going along. And oh, Marissa.
Max, is the bike? Oh, actually, is this the one that Catherine just asked about the jump box? The bike queue jump box only implemented at a signalized intersection? It is, isn't it?
Okay.
Is that Catherine? Is that the one that
No.
you just?
No, that's a different question.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah,
Just
no, you're all over it, Marissa.
I'm all over it. Just I heard a similar wording. So okay, no, Max, let's start again. Is the bike queue jump box only implemented at signalized intersection?
I can't think of it being used at mid-block or anything, Catherine.
No, I've only ever seen it at signalized,
Yeah,
unless there's another treatment out there on the network I'm not familiar with. But yeah, typically head start boxes are at the signals.
yeah, I agree. That's the only time I've seen them. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
No
Cheers.
worries. Feel free to share in the chat if you know other sites. But let's have a chat through Melbourne's protected intersection. This is an example, sorry, an aerial image of the before, and then we'll show you what it looks like afterwards. Going to focus on the eastern side or the right-hand side of the screen. And what we've got, tricky to see, but adjacent this park, we've got a footpath, and then we've got a separated bicycle lane. So that's where riders would have positioned themselves approaching the intersection. There's a little bit of a buffer, and then there's a parking lane, clearway zone, but anyway, don't need to worry about that. So riders leading up to the intersection, they'd be riding along here, and just when the parking bay ends, the bicycle lane ends as well. And you've got this space here where there's absolutely nothing. So there's no cycling facilities. And that's really testament of how we have historically managed our intersections, where if you don't have the space to continue the bicycle lane, then just drop it and she'll be right. But she won't be right. It's definitely not good practice to go with that approach. You would not do that with the traffic lane. You wouldn't just drop off a vehicle traffic lane and be like, they'll work it out. So definitely want to rectify that. You will see examples of this across the network, though. It's definitely not just this site that's gone with that kind of thinking. The other thing I wanted to mention is just the stand-up lanes at this intersection. So the stand-up lanes, for those not familiar with that terminology, it's just how many traffic lanes are at the intersection, specifically at the approach in this instance. And so we've got a dedicated left turn lane there. We've got a through lane. And then we've got this one, which is actually a through and right. So it's a combined. So we've got 3 stand-up lanes. That's the before scenario. Now I'll give you the 50-50 so you can do the compare the pair. And we can see that our protected bicycle facility is now extended all the way to the hold line. So there's no longer that dead man's land where there's no bicycle facilities. It's continued all the way up to the intersection, which is already a big win. The other thing that you may have noticed is we have lost the stand-up lane. So basically that dedicated left turn lane has been amalgamated with the adjacent through lane. So now you've got a through and left and a through and right. So you've got 2 stand-up lanes instead of 3. And the reason that that was done is to ensure that that separated facility is continuously provided for riders as they enter this intersection. That same approach has been consistently applied across all these legs, slightly different depending what direction you're coming from, but generally that kind of thinking. And because this was a novel treatment within Melbourne, and as I spoke to earlier, there were a range of stakeholders involved in this project that were quite concerned about the operation. So there was a lot of road safety audits and workshop sessions to determine how this conceptual design could actually be feasibly installed in our network. Those engagement stakeholders included people from disability groups, local bug groups or cycling groups, pedestrians, full gamut of industry as well as heavy vehicles and things like that. Anyway, one of the most sticky points was the corner refuge island, and how exactly that would play out. And so that design took an iterative approach, and I'll guide you along this little story now of how that humble little corner refuge island advanced into what we can see today. So on the left there, we just initially had just this tiny little jelly bean, but there are some people in the engagement group thinking that's probably not wide enough and big enough, so motorists will be able to see that, or riders will even see that. So a bit concerned that there's going to be lots of unnecessary collisions with that. So that's when the decision was made to, bulk that up a bit, make it a bit beefier so it's easier for everyone to see. And they completed a bit of swept path design or swept path analysis on this particular feature, and it's a little bit difficult to see, but there's kind of these tight curves, and it's not just one smooth radius around there. So that's how we got to iteration number 3 here, where you can see with this little boomerang croissant type shape, you've just got a much smoother type of corner refuge island. But then the cycling community group were a little bit concerned. Well, we know that this is a really, really popular commuter route, and we know we get lots of riders that are waiting to cross at the lights, and we're concerned that there's not enough space to be able to provide that queuing. And that's why we had to shave off some of that croissant and get this like bending hot dog shape. And finally, what occurred in our final iteration was, well, we're going to put some mountable areas on this facility as well. And the reason that was enacted was so that riders don't actually have to deviate as much as previous designs. So if you were riding through here at speed, you could kind of cut the corner a little bit. That kind of movement, as opposed to going like this. So that was just to help with the continuity of the journey and save you having to, slow down for a few seconds to avoid that. And goes back to that point that we had earlier today around, well, should we be actually saying that riders need to slow down at these conflict points? And I think it's a great discussion. I think it's a really valid point. This is not an example of that, where it's just saying some riders want to maintain that speed and we should facilitate that. Now, to get all the stakeholders over the line, they thought, well, this all looks good on paper, but what would this feel like in the real world? Had a look at how much flights were there to the Netherlands, and, it's a bit too much to send them all business class. So instead, the next best thing, they went out to a depot in Bendigo. So this is an off-road facility, completely away from public. And they line marked a 1-to-1 scale of this exact intersection. So basically, this is what was proposed in the design. These are the concerned stakeholders. You ride through it and you tell me, can we make this work? And as part of this little demonstration, they had a vehicle that was driving around and performing left turn through movements, right movements, all those types of things. Just to ensure that everyone felt comfortable that, yep, this can work. It's not going to be the end of the world. We've seen it applied multiple other jurisdictions. Let's give this a go. So really, really interesting engagement demonstration. I'm not saying you'd need to do this for every project that you worked on, but because this was so innovative and had quite a lot of buy-in, I think it was a pretty cool way to get everyone over the line with that one. I might pause there and give everyone 3 minutes now to have a little stretch and get yourself a nice cup of coffee. 3-minute break. I think that was 3 minutes. Was that 3 minutes, Marissa?
Yes. It was. I managed to get 3 big bites of my chicken wrap.
Delicious. We've got you during lunch.
Oh, yes. I'm too full up on coffees. Being back in Melbourne, that's what happens. Too much caffeine.
Any questions during the break?
Just a question in the Q&A. If we have a left turn pocket at the signalised intersection, how would we incorporate the protected bike facility, Max?
I'm not 100% sure I understand what is meant by the left turn pocket. I might need to see an example of that. Can you think of?
I think if it was to, yeah, if it was a left slip lane,
Ah,
yeah. So I guess, yeah, more of that. Did you know in the before it had the left turn
yeah,
lane, but I guess if it was a left turn slip,
yeah.
how would you incorporate the protected bicycle facility?
Slip lanes are its own type of beast. We do go
Mm,
into slip lanes shortly.
yeah.
Ideal world would be to try and bring riders off road, so adjacent the slip lane,
Mm,
and then cross perpendicular to the slip lane at a raised point.
yeah.
That's how you would manage it there. But I wouldn't necessarily say you'd call that a protected intersection design
No.
because this is more to do with common cross intersection types without slip lanes.
Yeah.
I think I've got an example of one actually in Queensland. Do you mind if we spend a bit of time just hunting?
No, go for it. I guess like, around the Sidra analysis where, you remove a dedicated left and what does that look like on the network? And, does
Yeah,
that, bugger up the network? But I guess if our strategy here is to improve cycle safety, well, then something has to go. And if that means taking out the traffic lane to accommodate a safer cycling facility, then that's what we've got to do.
brilliant. No, I agree. If you've strategically identified that this is a really important cycling route, then I do believe that can come at the cost of other users. So
Yeah.
particularly motor vehicles, because they tend to have priority at every single other intersection. So
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. I think also if you get caught up in that level of service argument, because that is
Yeah.
such a rigid,
Mm,
identifiable framework, a safe system assessment might be a good idea for your project. If you haven't heard of that term, by all means get in touch. Happy to chat through that one. But that's also a scoring method where you can look at the safety of an intersection and be like, this is the score of it
mm,
currently. And then if you install a protected intersection, the score's all the way down here. Like it improves things significantly for pedestrians and cyclists. And then you've got that kind of
yeah.
answer to all the level of service traffic engineers who are saying you can't do it because of this report, but there's a safe
Mm,
system assessment report that says, well, you can't do it because of this. Like this
yeah.
is the safety of people.
Correct.
Anyway, so I got the image up. Can you see that one, Catherine?
Yes.
So this is a protected intersection up in Queensland, and you can see most of the legs have conventional stand-up lanes. There's a lot going on here, to be fair. And they've got little corner refuge islands. They look a little bit different, but the same kind of idea. But on this one southeastern leg is the slip lane. And this is the idea that I was talking about before, where if you could get cyclists off road, like don't even try and approach the intersection here, and staying off road, in this instance, it's actually signalized the crossing point. You could, in less busy environments, probably not suitable here, raise this as a crossing point, so create like a wombat crossing, and then finish those journeys through that intersection. But this is just one example of managing that conflict with slip lanes introduced as well, but it's pretty difficult. All right, I'll keep going though. Good question. We'll give a prize out there for the slip lane question. And I wanted to just mention that it's quite common as part of protected intersection designs. You do your swept path checks for your heavy vehicles and make sure that all those turning movements can still be facilitated. It's also quite common to have to move back the hold line. So you basically want to make sure that as this big vehicle is heading through there, they're not going to be colliding head on with other propped, stopped, waiting to go motorists, that you have to shift back the hold line to accommodate that. Just a note there to say that you might be part of the design as well. Last little bit on the protected intersections, and then we'll move on. So this is just going through Melbourne's protected intersection. And I'm riding through here, and I've got a taxi on my right, and the taxi is about to turn left. So the yellow is the route that conventionally a bike lane would be set up to, facilitate. So that's the kind of conventional route. And the green is obviously the left turn taxi. This is a moment in time. So while we're looking at in the slides, it looks very slow and stagnant, but remember, this is all happening, simultaneously, basically. And that yellow route, once again, would be a conventional path crossing, and that is where the taxi would cross over. So you can see that conflict angle is not great, and basically you as a rider would need to make the decision right now. Has that taxi seen me? Are they going to yield, or do I need to slam on the brakes? And that's when things get pretty dicey pretty quickly. But the purple line is instead the movement that we're taking because of the protected intersection, because of the corner refuge islands. And once again, a moment forward in time and showing those different paths traveled, we can see that we have that offset. And more importantly, if you actually look in the passenger side window, you can kind of see that the driver's neck is facing towards me as the bike rider that's crossing, which is exactly what you want to see. So it's basically maximize those sight angles to be able to, sight lines, to be able to achieve that eye contact. Great stuff. This is just a reminder also, we need to have clear sight lines approaching the conflict point as well. So we have an approach clear space and the turn space. All of that is important just to make sure that you can adequately sight one another. I think this figure does it a little bit better, just to acknowledge that it's important both from the driver's perspective, that they see any riders, and also for the rider's perspective, that they're able to see vehicles that could be performing those turning movements. So it's good from both of those perspectives. Alrighty, signalized intersections now, and Catherine will love this one. It's what's wrong with this photo. Oh, there's lots to talk about for this one, but you bring back memories.
Oh yes, the COVID days. Oh geez, and getting my partner to take a photo of me doing this. So embarrassing.
We'll get Catherine out of the way.
Great content. Get me out of there.
We'll move the banner down as well and have a look at the intersection. And I'll give you 43 seconds to determine what you think is wrong with the photo. So pop your answers in the chat. Also a prize out if you know where this was taken. I'll go for country, not city. What's right with it? Good question. We'll give a prize out there. It's not Australia. That is correct. It's not the USA. It is Canada. I saw Canada quickly come through. I'll let Marissa find that participant. All right, good answers coming through, and agree. There is lots to interpret in this photo. Uneven surface, poor pavement condition, absolutely spot on. All of it's a little bit unusual. The planter box as well, we spoke about that as being potential pedaling hazard. It's a little bit offset there, but you could imagine that's if that was struck or anything like that, it's not in a great position to be maintained. The grate as well, those types of lids are really, really common in North America. They also still use the longitudinal ones that's still on their network, which is really not good at all. So if you see any of them in Australia, make sure you report them because they definitely need to be replaced. Yeah, riders' tires can get easily caught in those things. Catherine.
This is just me thinking out loud. What is the diamond pavement marker? Is that like to stop?
I think it's a good question. I like to be put on the spot, Catherine. I think
Sorry,
that's saying
Max.
no. I think that's the start.
Anthony and David has said caution, hazard.
Yeah,
Question
okay.
mark. Yeah, it's a fun. I mean, look, it's a shocking. Everything about this is shocking. So
Yeah.
let's not get caught up on the diamond.
Yeah,
Because
maybe it is the
the
hazard
whole
for the
yeah, I think it might. Yeah, could be.
I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Caution for the drainage.
Yeah, I'll pay that. That sounds sensible. I
I
for some reason I thought it was like the start of the bicycle lane, so they kind of do that at every intersection, but maybe
yeah,
that's not right. I wish I could look over at the other side and then I'd be able to check.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it's a peculiar example where we've got a diagonal crossing, and that's because we've got bidirectional on one side being shifted onto the other side of the carriageway. It's certainly not common, but it is the most direct way to actually manage that. Now, I wouldn't be advocating for this in high-speed areas because, well, we know that drivers are, going to run red lights, which means those impact speeds can be quite significant, certainly above the 30-kilometer threshold that we spoke about before. So if you were investigating this type of treatment or how it could be managed, well, I would suggest looking at ways to manage those speeds. So you could be looking at raising the intersection or providing little raised platforms on the approach, just so that, if there is a motorist that does run the red light, they're not going to be hitting cyclists crossing diagonally at speed. We'll give a prize out there, Marissa, to anyone that mentioned, or sorry, the second person that mentioned crossing diagonally. Bit unusual there. The head starts. All right. So head start boxes are a little bit to do with safety and a little bit to do with wayfinding. So the safety element of the head start boxes are, well, you've got riders that are positioning themselves at the very front of the queue, so they're not stuck in the midst of traffic and forgotten about. They're right there and kind of the most visible. The Austroads Guide has these 4 different general arrangements for the head start boxes. There's some dot points for consideration within the guide itself that will tell you when you may or may not use specific ones. And I'll give you the high level approach, but by all means, have a flick through the table to make sure that you're picking the right one for you. And basically all you need to consider is where is the cycling connectivity? So where does the rider go after this intersection? And in example A, where we've got this tiny little bike box and it's adjacent the curbside, this would suggest that riders may be traveling, perhaps turning left, perhaps going through, but not going right, because it's not being encouraged to move across to the right lane. If we compared that to example D, where the head start box is widened to cover all of those traffic lanes, all of those stand-up lanes, then the continuity of the cycling facilities would likely cross over the left, the through, and the right. So it's got that wayfinding element to it as well. I just wanted to highlight example C here, which is this idea of having kind of one bicycle lane that is in between a through lane and a left lane, and then another bicycle lane between a through and a right. Actually not that common and not one that we'd probably recommend. Instead, to get riders into the right lane, you just keep them in this lane all the way to the intersection and then extend it over to the right lane, which is what's shown in example D. Or you'd provide hook turn facilities so they don't have to worry about getting to the right turn at all. So just wanted to say example C, not that common, not really a big fan of it. But yeah, there's some literature in there in case you're interested in having a flip through in the Off-Roads Guide. Left turn and through treatments. So we're moving away clearly from our protected intersections, and now we're into the space of what are we going to do when riders need to stay at grade on carriageway level and there's no separation. Well, a few ways that you can manage it. One is through the use of sharrows. So this is once again creating that idea of this is no longer just a general traffic lane. This is a shared lane, and riders don't have to position themselves to the curbside. They can just ride straight in the middle. So that's one scenario that you try and get riders into that prime central position. Another example is actually bending the bicycle lane out. So it's continuing the facility all the way to the hold line so that it isn't, you know, a bit of a free-for-all like in the Sharrow. It is continuous. And then you've got the green conflict point just to highlight that, you know, this is where that conflict exists. Neither of these treatments are by any means best practice and by any means going to eliminate the risk of collisions between vehicles turning left and riders traveling in that area. But just thought we would bring that to your attention in case you are physically unable to constrain in your sites, just give you some options to help. Okay, a little bit of story time for me now. This is just an anecdote from my old route to work. I don't live here anymore, but I used to live just adjacent this intersection. And I was east, so on the right-hand side of the screen. And work was over to the west, so I'd be riding along this road pretty often. It's 50 kilometers per hour. It's pretty busy. You can see on the right-hand side, there is an on-road bicycle lane, which is adjacent the dooring zone. And this is me just having a great time riding along here. You get to the end of the parking lane and the bicycle lane does drop off. But what does occur is we've got the use of sharrows within that left turn lane. So that's just an example of the previous figure that I showed there, that actually occurring in the real world. As a rider, you just travel all the way to the hold line. You don't need to do a left turn. You can continue straight. It's supported by signage at this site. So all vehicles have to turn left, but if you're a rider, you can continue straight and continue in this kind of journey. And that was me on my ride to work. And then after a grueling 10-hour day slogging away in the consultant lifestyle, I'd be back on my bike, ready to cycle home. And similar kind of journey on my way home. We've got an on-road bicycle lane in the dooring zone. And you get to the end of the parking lane this time though, and all the facilities just end. So there's nothing whatsoever. And in this scenario, it's much more stressful because you've just got lots of different turning movements potentially occurring. So vehicles wanting to go straight, vehicles wanting to get over into that left turn lane. And it's really unclear where you as a rider should be aiming for. So should you be going into the left turn lane to then continue straight, or do you push into the through lane to continue straight? Super uncomfortable. And the reason I wanted to bring this to your attention is just, you know, ideally we want to create these networks where it is consistent, both from the rider's perspective, so that they know exactly what to expect as they get to the next intersection, but also for drivers. So, you know, you make it consistent for them as well. So they know that at this location along this route, I need to be aware that riders could be traveling on my near side, as an example. It's pretty uncommon to see that consistency across networks or across corridors, but certainly at isolated intersections, we should be getting consistency there. So we should be applying the same treatments on one side of an intersection as the other, unless there's a very good reason not to do so. But generally, you want to have that consistency. All right, slip lane. So briefly touched on this one before, and it is one of those very challenging environments where basically you've got a long area where the conflict could occur. So left turn vehicles crossing over the bicycle facility, they're really able to do that multiple locations along that length. So having the longer conflict length increases the risk for riders, because it's no longer just distinct points, isolated areas that you can perhaps manage. It's much more expansive. So Austroads does have a little diagram of what could be utilized in examples like this, which is this idea of bringing riders off-road and then kind of doing a pretty swift right turn and crossing over the slip lane before entering the bicycle lane again. I would strongly recommend, if you're doing this, that you would be doing a raised crossing point here. So that's raised up, the Wombat crossing, so that riders have got the priority crossing there. My only caveat in saying that is I'll get rid of this image and get rid of all the marking. This is an 80 km/h speed zone. It's a busy arterial road. The riders that are using this facility currently are incredibly confident, right? If you take away this on-road facility, you get rid of this, and you build off-road, and then make them cross over here to then get back on road, there's a good chance that won't be used, or that will be underutilized. And instead, what may occur is riders will just ignore it altogether and enter the traffic lane, which is a higher risk. So I just like to be pragmatic about the solutions that are being investigated and think about the surrounding use and who's likely using that. If this was on your strategic cycling corridor network, ideally you would not have anything that looks like this, and it would all be off-road. And that's when, yeah, absolutely, let's cross the slip lane, let's bring it all away from the carriageway. Spot on. I completely agree with that. But this, to me, has been set up, you know, historically, and it's got really going to just attract those riders that are incredibly confident. And that may then influence your decision of what types of treatments would be appropriate to be installing. All right, hook turns. We love hook turns here in Victoria. We do them for both vehicles and for cyclists as well. The general idea is, rather than get over into the right turn traffic lane, just use a hook turn box. It's way easier. It's so much less stressful. And the hook turn box itself, it sits in front of the pedestrian crosswalk area. And it usually just features the bicycle symbol as well as the turn symbol. Gives riders a nice clear area where they can prop and wait until they get their green and then head over to complete their right turn. I'll show you what this actually means as an example. So this one, there's 4 hook turn boxes. So hook turns are provided for riders at each leg of the intersection. And if you were traveling the bottom of the screen here and you're waiting there, you could, push yourself out in front of the right turn or in front of vehicles there and head into the right turn lane and do something like that. But more often than not, it can be stressful to do that. Or if you're in free-flowing conditions, it can be actually very difficult to get to that right turn lane because you have to push yourself over kind of diagonally to get into that spot. So instead, it's like, well, let's not deal with that stress. Let's instead head over here. We'll head to the left. You can just prop and wait there. It's far enough away from the carriageway that you're not going to interrupt that through traffic. So you can see that there's space there. And also space between that hold line and not impacting on pedestrians crossing there as well. Once you get the green to go, you're the first vehicle to kind of enter that space, and you get to enter that adjacent street there. So that's the general idea of the hook turns. It's just an example of what it looks like out on the ground. They can be both applied at cross intersections, but also at T intersections. So this is just another example out of the Austroads guide where if you were riding through here and you wanted to turn right, well, rather than you trying to get across into the right turn lane and do that, it can be very, very stressful to push yourself out in front of live traffic. Instead, just come along here. There'd be a little pedestal, little button for you to push there. That would stop all traffic. And then once you've got your green to go, you just go across like that. So it's just about making the journey a little bit more comfortable, not forcing you to access right turn lanes that you don't feel, easy to get to. This is an example of that kind of being applied over in Adelaide. Much easier just to get yourself set up there, push the button as a rider, as opposed to forcing yourself over into that double right turn lane. This is a weird example, but I'll check in with Marissa first. I got distracted.
Right. Oh, no, that's all right. I probably turned my video on a second too late. We just got a question. Is it generally acceptable or safe to have a bus jump lane and an on-road cycle lane arrangement? It was from a couple of slides ago.
Yeah, I mean, perfect world is no. Heavy vehicles and riders don't mix. Heavy vehicles, so that 30 km/h speed that I spoke about before, the collision speed, is an average vehicle, but we know that death can occur with heavy vehicles at around 10 km/h. It takes nothing at all, walking pace. So it's a significant issue. The other, thing top of mind with that area is heavy vehicles, buses, trucks are filled with blind spots. And yes, their drivers are trained to recognize that they have blind spots, but not every rider that is riding adjacent a heavy vehicle would be aware of that and may not know that they're completely hidden, and it is quite scary. So generally don't think that they mix at all well. Providing that separation would be the go-to.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Max. And yeah, Lucas has just made a good comment that yeah, in Victoria we are very used to hook turns. In other states, the mere mention of hook turns scares the life out of some, even when it's just a sensible treatment for cyclists.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I happened to speak to a friend in New South Wales. They grew up there, and they never heard of the term hook turns, and they've never seen that done before. But as a rider, they do that anyway. So they do that movement of going left to go right because it's easier. They've never known that to mean you're performing a hook turn. So I think there is a little bit of that, you know, some of the community may already be doing this. They just don't know that it's called that.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yes, just while we're on hook turns, what about shared hook turns for cyclists and motor vehicles?
Oh,
So
yeah.
right of way, etc.
That's a mess.
It
That's a
is,
real
yes.
mess.
I've never
Oh,
tried it. I don't think I would.
I
I'd
think, yeah, the Melbourne CBD has a few
yeah,
examples of
yeah,
that going on, and they're all terrible. I don't
yes.
think there's an easy way to manage that. If I've got time at the end of the session, I might try and look at an intersection that's got an example of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're just really confusing, basically.
Yeah. Do you know what? Since I've lived in Victoria, I have not done one hook turn.
In the car,
No.
on the
Or as a
bike,
cycle. Nope.
really?
And it just
You're
goes to the
joking.
no.
I'm
I
excited to go for a ride with you tomorrow, Catherine.
Yeah.
I reckon I just yeah, because when I lived in Melbourne, it was very much I don't want to drive
Yeah.
because there's just too much going on. I'd rather take the tram because I love a tram, walk or cycle. But yes, no, I've never done one.
Well,
Mm.
bring the helmet tomorrow, Catherine. We're on saddle.
Oh gosh, yes, let's give it a go. Um, and just off topic, you know the Boulevard treatment, Max, in it's Yarra City Council, isn't it? The Boulevard example,
Yeah, the Napier Street, Fitzroy. Pretty sure it's
Napier Street.
Yarra City
Okay,
Council. Yeah.
great, thank you.
No worries.
That's all. Cheers.
Thank you. So this is an example of mid-block, so it's not intersections, which is why I said it was weird. But kind of same philosophy of going left to go right. You know, riders are kind of being asked to get off road and pick a gap in traffic to then continue their movement over to the shared path on the other side of the carriageway. And it's really just trying to discourage, sorry, that kind of sweeping diagonal movement, which would be a lot of information to be able to process. And yeah, obviously the risks associated with that. I'll keep banging on through the slides though. And we've got a really big intersection here. This is another little Max anecdote. Riding my bike from the bottom of the screen and trying to turn right, because that's where I used to live. And let's just have a look what's going on here. We've got a service lane, service road crossing over here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 stand-up lanes. We've got some light rail or tram tracks because this is Melbourne. We've got another 3 stand-up lanes on the other side, another service road. Huge intersection. There's a lot going on. And the area that I'm going to focus on is just on the southern side, the southern leg of this intersection. And I've just got a photo of what it looks like approaching this location. Looks something like this. You can see the tiniest little head start box, which is pretty cute. And it's not on at the moment, but you can see adjacent the traffic signals is this additional panel. and that's the bicycle signal. So all that is, it's just a green bike light, green symbolic bike. And that goes first. So everyone else is stopped. Conventionally, this through lane would be up next, but riders get the head start. So that's the purpose of the bicycle signal. Ensures that riders can enter that intersection, they can maybe complete the intersection before it's opened up to traffic, and just gets them in that prime position, the central position, so they don't have to worry about starting up their movement when all the cars are going as well. Now, the reason I'm sharing this is because it's actually also acting as a bit of wayfinding, because it's saying you have got the green to travel through. So it's actually saying when you get that green light as a rider, your movement to travel through, you're good to go. But as I mentioned, I live to the right, and so I immediately saw the green light and was like, great, I'm going to start turning right. And the issue with my naive approach is I basically got halfway through this intersection, halfway completing this right turn, when all of the other traffic, the through traffic, they got their green. So the green was not long enough for me to complete the right turn, which is understandable. It's not set up for that purpose. And it put me in this really precarious situation where I then had to wait in the middle of the intersection, wait to pick a gap, and then complete that right turn. So I suppose I just want to acknowledge that love the head start bicycle signal box, bicycle signals. And they're a great idea, but they also may be misconstrued by users. Even myself, who's been riding for many, many years now. And yeah, it could be perhaps communicated better with some including directions on the light itself as well, just to clarify what movements are being permitted with that type of device. But just wanted to share that. They do these very well over in Perth. I've got several examples of along this corridor where you've got the bicycle head start signal implemented as part of the signal face. So it's not just an attachment or a supplementary item, it's all one cohesive unit. And it's consistently applied at multiple intersections along this corridor. So if you're a rider, you're expecting to see that green go first for you. And drivers, you just have to sit there and wait, which is really, really cool. So a really big fan of them, particularly in your CBD environments where you do have lots of congestion and traffic. It's really good just to flush out all your cycling traffic so they get the first stab at the intersection. Another note on temporary traffic management. I know I went on a little bit of a rant last week about it, but thinking about how we can manage our cycling networks when we are undergoing construction works. So in this example, we just put up a sign, which is bicycle lane closed, merge right, and really terrible example because prior to this point is actually a separated cycling facility. So you've got people that are not potentially comfortable riding on road. And then this sign is saying, well, just push yourself in front of traffic, she'll be fine. Wow. Not a great solution there. I think in these scenarios, you could really look at providing detours by using existing footpath. So helping to facilitate movement away from the carriageway. Appreciate that there are some concerns with bringing riders onto the footpath as well, but certainly worth investigating. Now, the cool thing for those with excellent vision, and I'll zoom in on this one, there's a sign for a hook turn for the cyclist. Just so it's a little reminder that you're okay to do that and you're encouraged to do that. That's all good in Melbourne. The other reason I brought this in is because a little bit of irony. this was the temporary traffic management scheme set up for Melbourne's protected intersection. So that project was set up to, significantly improve the safety for riders, but the interim or the construction of it didn't quite have that same safety lens, which was a shame. So yeah, really think about that as part of your projects as well. A few more things I wanted to get through. Feel free to keep questions coming in though. Module 2, design review assignment. Thank you for those that have submitted. They're very exciting. We love to see it. We haven't got through all the marking yet, but rest assured, we'll get through it all. I just wanted to mention one thing about the assignment that leads into this topic of intersections quite well. And it's actually on the first page here, the intersection with Wellington Street. Now, I've very conveniently provided myself some little icons to help facilitate this discussion. I'm going to drop a little bicycle rider down on the bicycle lane. I'm going to do some green vehicles in the inside lane. Could have been a graphic designer in a previous life. And then on the outside lane, I'm going to just put, I'll just do one orange vehicle. Now, let's say this is a point in time, and right now the lights have gone green. The stand-up lane was a left turn and a left and through. However, our rider may very well want to pick a color that stands out. Our rider may want to just carry on through like this. Hopefully everyone's with me so far. If the vehicle on the inside lane was turning left, they may get to this point here and be like, oh yeah, I'll just do the whole turning movement. They may be able to, get to just before the conflict point and then realize there's a rider there. Or as they're approaching the intersection, check their wing mirror to see that there's a rider there. And that mitigates the risk to some extent. It's not as good as a protected intersection by any means, but that's more or less how things are managed currently, that level of risk. However, what I really wanted everyone to be aware of is whenever we've got dual turn lanes, in this case, 2 left turn lanes, the vehicle on the outside has limited or restricted vision of the rider. And the reason for that is because they've got this wall of cars that are just queued up and waiting. And so they may assume, because the green vehicle has started their left turn, that vehicle in the outside lane can also commence their left turn and just go for it. This kind of phenomena is referred to as masking or dynamic visual obstruction. It's not a static visual obstruction. It's not like there's always something in the way that's blocking those sight lines. It's dynamic, it's moving. But something that you definitely need to be aware of if you're designing any dual turn lanes where they could be near pedestrian or bicycle facilities, because you've got that risk. That kind of risk can occur. So what you could do instead to help mitigate this is, well, you could separate the phasing. So riders and pedestrians, you cross at a certain stage and then the left turn movements go. You could also just block the outside left turn lane. So there's only one left turn lane just to simplify it, reduces the number of conflict points as well. Just some quick ideas. You can also try and move riders into a more prominent position before they get to that area. But I had another example of this kind of in practice that I wanted to share. Before I move on to that though, if you haven't done your assignments, please don't include that as one of your answers, because we want you to work on your own analysis and your own recommendations. I don't want you to just type down notes of things that I've said just then. So don't include it in your assignment, please. The other example I wanted to show was an example up in Toowoomba where they've just used paint to help delineate this. I'll look back on myself, actually. I'll start at the intersection. What's happening is riders want to travel through, but the left turn is kind of the dominant movement at this location. And prior to this intersection, riders were riding adjacent the dooring zone or close to the curbside. So in order to get riders over and across so that they continue that through journey, they've just implemented this massive, blob of paint so that riders are being encouraged to get from that position over there near the dooring zone over into this traffic lane area so that they can then continue all the way through and continue that through journey. Not an example of best practice. I just happened to come across that. I thought it was an interesting example, so I thought I would share that one up in Toowoomba. Work for today. So we're up to module 3, intersection treatments. Got another video for you all to watch, so you can finish that at the end of today's session. And we've also got a quiz for you. So similar kind of function and layout as our module 1 quiz. So you just click on that. You've got up to 3 attempts. Any questions that I may have missed there, Catherine, or anything you'd like to share yourself? I can look up this hook turn example in Melbourne. Or Marissa?
No, all good, Max. That pavement arrow marking's pretty curly.
Yeah, it's a good one. You haven't seen
It's a
that
good
one
one.
before?
No, I have not. No, it's a first. Thanks for
I like to
sharing.
keep everyone on their toes.
Yeah. No, all good.
Elizabeth Lonsdale. Anything from you, Marissa?
No, all good.
This is during
Everyone's
construction.
happy.
I'll just
Anyone
show.
have any last questions? Please pop them in the chat.
So this is a really bad example of hook turns going on in Melbourne, where if you were riding from here, or if you were driving from here, that's the hook turn bay, and there's really no clarity if you were riding where you would position yourself. You can see a very faded mark there. That's actually for through riders, so they can continue through. You can also see it's similar arrangement there. That bicycle symbol is for the through movement. But if you're performing a hook turn at this location, it's pretty unclear where you as a rider would set up. You'd likely just take that traffic position, but vehicles would absolutely hate you if you did that. And there would be a lot of hooting and hollering if you tried to position yourself there. So I don't think there's any good, ways around that. It's very, very messy, and one of the peculiar things about living in a hook turn area, I guess, is trying to manage that, both modes trying to get into that hook turn space.
Just chuck in a few tram tracks too on the hook turn.
Yeah, that'll fix it.
That'll fix it. Yeah. Oh gosh.
Cool.
Thank you, Max.
No worries. Thanks, everyone. We've given you some time now to watch the video and get stuck into the quiz. We look forward to finishing off our final module on Thursday, which will be lovely.
Okay. Thanks for joining, everyone.
good.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you. Thanks, Marissa.
Ta-ta,
Thanks,
bye.
Max.
Bye,
See ya.
everyone.
Bye.